See if it'll fire up. Let's see, what do we got? Yep, there it is. Okay, so if you're listening and you are in the chat room, I just put a link up. This is the chart of Sai Baba. Today is Sai Baba's birthday. Satya Sai Baba. If you burn incense, especially if you burn Nag Champa incense, you have supported Sai Baba and burned his incense in your home. Okay? So what I've done here, now Sai Baba is a very controversial figure. Extremely controversial. And what I've done here is I've fired up this chart, first of all, to see if there's any mystic threads that run through Sai Baba's chart, and to also look at the controversy of his life and to figure out if there are some pieces here. So if you're on hold or you want to check this out, excuse me, go into the chat room. There's a link, and you'll be able to see this chart. Now, when we look at Sai Baba's chart, when we look to any chart, the planet that represents mysticism is Neptune. It is clearly the most mystical planet in the chart, in the zodiac. And when Neptune shows up, we get an idea of where the mysticism of the chart is expressed. And depending upon the angle or the house or the angle of other planets, Neptune takes on greater or lesser significance, as with any sign, right, or any planet. In Sai Baba's chart, Neptune is directly on his midheaven, okay? So what we have here is we have Neptune as a very primary expression of the chart. Neptune is the most mystical aspect of the chart. And the midheaven is that place where we take our essence, what we do, and we bring it to the world stage. That's what the midheaven is. And it's the gateway to the 10th house, and the 10th house is the world stage. But the midheaven is the portal, and it's the angle, and it's the most anytime you've got anything on angles, and Sai Baba's got, clearly he's got planets on angles, and they square, by the way. Some of them square. This is a stressed part of the chart. Stressed good or stressed negatively, stressed positive, but there's a stress there. So he's got Neptune right on his midheaven. So clearly this would be an aspect that would relate itself to this person being involved in a mystical livelihood. Now, when you look at his Neptune is at 26 degrees. It's right at the end of Leo, so it's losing some of its steam. But nonetheless, it's a calling card for him in the world, conjunct his midheaven. He's known as a mystic. So if you have Neptune that close, I don't care if you're Sai Baba or Joe Blow, you're going to have a very profound relationship to mysticism and try to share that with the world. Now, his Neptune is in Leo, so it takes on the characteristic of being a leader. It would be different if you had Neptune in Scorpio. If it was Neptune in Scorpio, it would be much more diffuse, and it would be expressed perhaps more through art or more through experience. Neptune in Scorpio is very experiential. Maybe it would be something along the lines of the person would go through a very heavy drug addiction, and they would come out the other side, and they would share that with the world, and they would share their, the mystical power they derived not only through overcoming their drug addiction, but actually in the drug addiction itself. And that would be another expression of Neptune. But here in Leo, there's a leadership role. Now, also, when we look at Neptune, we look at deception, because Neptune is also very illusory, right? So here we have the best and the worst of Neptune, right on the midheaven. Inspiration, leadership, but also deception. When we see Saturn in his chart, he's got Saturn in Scorpio. And what we have with Saturn in Scorpio is that it's squaring Neptune. And his Saturn is in the 12th house. So what we're trying to, theoretically what Saturn would be doing the best that Saturn would do in this chart, it would be checking Sai Baba. It would be forcing Sai Baba to be very clear, very Saturnian about his motivation. I mean, it would be a check and balance theoretically in his chart to keep him on the straight and narrow. But as we'll see with Sai Baba, and I will read the description of his life after this, that was not necessarily the case. Now, these are fixed signs. Leo's a fixed sign. Scorpio's a fixed sign. So patterns can be really locked into place with fixed signs. And if they're locked into place, then sometimes it can be hard to change them. So if Sai Baba, at one point in time, established himself as a spiritual authority, it's almost like a seal, it's almost like a seal that can't be broken, for better or for worse. Now that he's been kind of an undisputed spiritual authority, he can get away with a lot of shit. And Sai Baba did. Sai Baba was known for being able to procure miracles. One of the things that he would do is he would, out of thin air, he would manifest, watches, rings. And his most famous trick was to manifest something out of his palm called vibhuti. Vibhuti. It was like an ash. Like his palms would exude this ash or extrude this ash, and he would take the ash, he'd rub it on people's foreheads. This is one of his best and most frequently used parlor tricks. This was how he could convey to people that he was magical. And again, that's Neptune on the 10th house, right in the midheaven. I'm going to show you. It's sleight of hand. It's illusion. And nobody really knows if Sai Baba, was able to actually manifest these things out of thin air. But he certainly got the reputation for being able to do that. And in fact, a lot of Americans went and hung out with Sai Baba, especially Americans that were into prosperity. Terry Cole Whitaker got onto the Sai Baba trip very early on, and tried to. I think Shirley MacLaine saw. So a lot of gurus, a lot of celebrities hung out with Sai Baba because he was like the genie in the bottle, and he could produce these little magic tricks. But what happened with Sai Baba, and by the way, he's got Mercury, Sun, Venus, all in Sagittarius, all in the first house, and that's the sign of the spiritual teacher. So he was wired in some ways to do this. And he has the chart of a guru. 0 degree Sagittarius. He's a teacher. But where Sai Baba gets in trouble is in the 8th house. And if you look at the 8th house, he's got Moon, Pluto, and the true node all in the 8th house. And Saturn, by the way, in the 12th house. Saturn in the 12th house can be challenging, especially as it's just coming out of the 12th house and into the 1st house. It's almost like it's caught between worlds. But when we look at Pluto conjunct Moon, Pluto retrograde, true node in the 8th house, the 8th house is a house of, just like the 12th house in some ways, it's a house of deception. You can't always readily understand the influences of those planets on the individual. They can hide them away. They can shove them away. Now, Pluto conjunct Moon is very intense. It's a person that is very into power, very into control, and it's in Cancer. So there's it's moody, and Cancer it's very, again, deceptive is the word that comes to mind, because Cancer comes off as nurturing, right? As nurturing, as loving. But when it's conjunct Pluto, when it's in the Moon and the 8th house, unless those planets are really supported, and in some ways they are, because they're trining Uranus down in this 4th, but unless they're really supportive, they can be very negative aspects, challenging aspects. Pluto in the 8th house is a very intense desire for power. And quite frankly, I'm surprised that Sai Baba lived as long as he did with Pluto in the 8th house. A lot of times when people have Pluto in the 8th house, they had their lives are marked by very dramatic deaths. Both Jimi Hendrix and Bruce Lee have Pluto in the 8th house and marked by dramatic deaths. So let's read a little bit about Sai Baba, shall we? Let's try to understand why this is an important chart and one of the things that we can relate back to. So I'm just gonna read this here, okay? So here he is. Sai Baba is rocking and rolling. You know, he's there's a Sai Baba Spiritual Center on Sunset Boulevard, east of Fairfax, you know, in Hollywood. So I mean, he implanted. Sai Baba is firmly implanted in the entertainment industry. You know, he's a guru that everybody has taken, taken to heart on some level, right? It's the magical stuff that grabs him. So I'm going to read this. This is from Wikipedia. So starting in 2000, a different story began to emerge about the alleged saint with the internet as the primary communication vehicle, anecdotes about his childhood and his miracles. He apparently had a number of stories where he was a magical child, and this led to his canonization as a kind of a Hindu saint. Anecdotes about his childhood and his miracles proved elusive to trace or verify. Such accusation began to proliferate as tales of deceit, fraud, murder, undesired sexual intimacies with men, and even with minors. Remember, Pluto, Moon, Cancer, 8th house, okay? There are further disclaimers such as the following. In India today, there is a man who claims to be God himself, an avatar. He claims to be all forms of God, perfect and pure. His followers claim that he performs many miracles. He's said to materialize sacred ash, rings, watches, and other objects out of air. He allegedly heals the sick, saves followers from fatal accidents, and even raises the dead. Is Sai Baba who he claims to be God, or is he an imposter and trickster? There we go. Neptune, right in the midheaven, right? We have both images of the divine and the devilish, right? An imposter, illusion, trickster. Strong evidence indicates that many of the miracles are illusions, fakery. But it is far worse than this. A large number of young victims have come forward and signed statements claiming that Sai Baba has sexually molested them. There are now many accounts of young people who have been coerced into oral sex and other sexual activities against their will. Since the publication of a document on the internet titled The Findings, March 2000, compiled by David and Faye Bailey, quite a few devotees of Sri Satya Sai Baba have become ex-devotees. Sexuality in Sai Baba's teachings comes across as a force that takes away from a devotee's focus on his or her spiritual growth and ought to be mainly used for procreation. Males and females are rigidly separated in the ashram life, and only married couples are allowed to share rooms. For a long time, up to the last few years, Sai Baba invited only male devotees for a private interview, a meeting in which a person is alone with Sai Baba. He never called in a woman alone. The first person to write about his private interview was the American Tal Brook, that's Brook with an E at the end, who stayed with Sai Baba for a year and a half during 1970-71. He wrote that Sai Baba hugged him in private interviews and with his hand tried to get Brook aroused. Around 1980, there was uproar in Malaysia when some members began a quiet campaign to discredit Sai Baba after they had conducted personal investigations of his lifestyle and behavior. This campaign to expose Sai Baba comprises mainly taped revelations by several Malaysian Indian students who claimed to have been sexually abused by Sai Baba. The sexual issue began to be discussed among devotees in Holland. And the story of Sai Baba's hugging and genital fondling with Keith Ord, UK, during his private interviews in the spring of 1990 came out in a national weekly magazine.